in COVID times, that's how quickly morality changes. So the idea of the culture is a false one. There is no the culture. It's not like a human version of a biosphere, even, I don't think. There is the state of things that does now exist, but like when you were talking about religion and saying this, this God, that what religion has been brilliant at, and it's needed to be, but so has science, is redefining what God is. What God was in 1400, God was capable of doing remarkable things. He was answerable for everything. And we worshipped him for it. A couple of hundred years later, a few things had been taken away from him, and we could answer for traveling the world and knowing it and discovering how the stars actually were not holes in a black cloth, but maybe were celestial objects and then a few hundred years later. And similarly, science, we use the word cosmos. Well, cosmos used to mean a very small sphere of a section of the solar system, and now it's some infinite thing. And there may indeed be dozens of them, millions of them. Who knows? According to string theory and quantum theory and all kinds of Schrödinger's number and all the rest of it, everything is redefined in each generation. So what is left that is absolute? And this is where religion has an argument with intellectual progress, because it wants to hang on to something that it believes is eternal and permanent and utterly always true. But there is no such thing. The morality, I did a debate with Christopher Hitchens, actually, about the Catholic Church and the people defending it when we attacked their attitude towards child sex scandals, said, well, in the 1960s, it wasn't such a big sin. And that is actually true. But it's not true coming from a Catholic whose whole point is that they are eternally true, that their morality is as true now as it was when St. Peter founded the church. That their enemy is people like me who are relativists, who say that there is no absolute morality, but that things change according to situation, circumstance, and knowledge. And so that is true of God. God alters every day. He adds a little bit of a quality here, or she does, and takes away another bit. Now no longer responsible for disease and no longer responsible for earthquakes, but may be responsible for something else. But it's a shrinking kingdom. And so the idea of there being an absolute and an eternal, it just doesn't seem to square with the way we have developed certainly over history, which is to say over the last 5,000 years, since we've been able to write things down. Before that, we can only judge how and who we were according to objects and artifacts and architecture. But since we've been able to write, it's pretty clear that the instability of, and I'm not saying this in a Derrida way of instability of meaning, although I do think you've misunderstood Derrida. I hope you've read Peter Salmon's biography, by the way. It might change your mind about him, but that's a whole other subject. So I'm
okay,
so
so
with
let's
you on
let's
this.
go back. Okay, so let's go after the eternal verities idea.
Yeah.
Clearly, religious conceptions shift. Although there's a core tradition that remains intact.
Well, a tradition by definition stays intact.
There's something that identifies it as the same entity across time.
Yes,
and
right.
Maybe that's even mutable. But I've looked for what might be regarded as eternal verities in the moral domain. So let me put a few forward.
Yeah.
The beautiful is more valuable than the ugly.
Yeah. Yep.
Truth is to be sought after in opposition to falsehood.
Yeah.
That's particularly true in relationship to the spoken word. The spoken word brings about remarkable transformations of reality itself. And it's for that reason that verbal truth is constitutive, but also of vital ethical significance.
Doesn't that make it all the more important to look at the discourse beneath verbal speech, I hesitate to use the word, but to deconstruct it, or at least to attempt to look at the currents that run through speech, to see, and they're not all Derridarian or Lacanian or Foucaultian, or whatever the adjective of Foucault is. They're not all about power. They're not all necessarily Marxist. The project, the Saussurean project and the others of looking at where language comes from, not just in a philological sense of derivation, but in a sense of where the discourses come from, is paramount, therefore. And so to say verbal, it's not just an utterance is in and of itself transformative, or if it is transformative, it might be wickedly so, or it might be negatively so, at least. Is that not right?
Well, with regards to your point about the analysis of the narratives and even the deconstruction, I would say it depends on the motive. And it's the motive, and this is, I suppose, to some degree why I'm skeptical, let's say, of the atheist skepticism. It's destructive. There's a destructive element to it. There's no archaeological redemption.
But that's nothing to do with motive. You said it was all about the motive.
Well, that's not necessarily the case, that it has nothing to do with motive. Motive's a tough one.
Yeah, it is. I mean, if my motive is to make money and I make a great discovery, it's as valuable as if my motive was to make a great discovery and I made a great discovery. The great discovery is made. How is the motive relevant?
Well, because your motives determine the decisions you make along the way.
Yeah.
If I'm fundamentally motivated by the belief that being is worth preserving, let's say, because on the whole it's a good, I'm going to react and think much differently than if I'm ambivalent about that, or if I feel at the bottom of my soul that the whole bloody project is of questionable utility and might as well be shelved. And that dichotomy, that characterizes us. We have Cain and Abel inhabiting us. There's no doubt about that. That's a fundamental truth. And if Cain has the upper hand, even if it's in the scientific endeavor, the consequences of that manifest themselves, and they manifest themselves destructively.
That's why it's interesting that you have to say Cain and Abel, because I think this brings us back to the very beginning, is the importance of myth and also of parable. And I'd like to end, because we're getting towards a bit where I have to move away. Oscar Wilde is known as a master of epigrams and wit, and people mistakenly think of him as shallow or trivial or facetious or vain or peacocky or something, but he was very profound, in fact, and of course he could be peacocky too. But there's a story
that isn't necessarily at odds with
no, they don't rule each other out. But here's an example of a great parable, which is why, again, it's why I love literature and the art of wit, because it zooms